Hello and welcome to episode number 56 of Behind the Impact. I'm your host, Jeremy Brown. In this episode, Christoph Gorder, the executive director of Airbnb.org, joins the show. Christoph, welcome to Behind the Impact.
It's great to be with you today, Jeremy.
I have been looking forward to this conversation. I feel like when I look at your career, you have seen a lot. Over 20 years, humanitarian aid, you worked at AmeriCares, Charity Water, now executive director at Airbnb.org. You have been there, done that, and seen quite a bit. You probably have seen the evolution of this work. I'm curious, how did this all start for you? How did you get into this space?
Well, it's a good question. It feels like a long time ago, and there's sort of two answers to that question. I think the first answer is just sort of the tactical question, which is like you get out of college. In my case, I had a liberal arts degree. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and I had a friend who was working at AmeriCares, sort of flying around the world, working on disaster response. It sounded really exciting, and I thought, and I got myself a job there, an entry level job, and I thought it would be sort of 2 years of Peace Corps kind of stuff, and then I would figure out what I was going to do and go and do it. And here I am, you know, 20 20 some years later. And it's become a career, which is really amazing. I mean, I fell in love with it right away. I fell in love with the impact, the challenges, the sort of the hustle that you had to bring to it, particularly in disaster response. So that's kind of the tactical answer. Is I kind of fell into it and then was like, wow, this is really interesting. The more personal answer is I kind of grew up in this environment. My parents were Lutheran missionaries in West Africa, and so I grew up in the Central African Republic and in Nigeria until I finished high school. So I grew up in an environment that was, there were a lot of aid workers, there were a lot of NGO workers, and we had, extreme poverty and really difficult circumstances right there, right? So I kind of grew up in that environment, which I think, A, prepared me for this kind of career, and B, just like it's real, like these are people that I, otherwise would have grown up with. So that's kind of the short answer.
So it sounds like you were born for this work.
Well, I mean, looking back, that's what you say. When you're along the journey, you ask yourselves lots of questions, along the way, like, how long will I do this? Is this where I, expect to see myself the next 10 years? But looking back, it does give a nice narrative.
And when you look back on that time at AmeriCares and Charity Water, what are some of the lessons that you've learned at those companies or organizations?
I mean, both were phenomenal organizations, and I really got lucky in the sense that I joined them both really pretty early stage. Americans had been around for a long time before I got there, but they were founder run, and I got there at the end of his tenure as an elderly gentleman in poor health when I got there. And very soon after I got there, they transitioned to a professional CEO who then sort of took what was a great idea and great DNA and scaled it. And I got to be have a front row seat in that for almost 15 years and learn a ton. And then I went over to Charity Water, and Charity Water was already, like was already doing great work, but there was so much more we could do. And so similarly started with a very, early stage systems and strategy, and then we grew it into what it is today, which was a phenomenal experience. I think, what I liked doing was going from zero to one, sort of an entrepreneurial approach to things, whether that was going into a disaster response in a country I'd never been to and getting a response off the ground, or thinking at a much more system level of how do we build a sustainable institution that's actually going to scale. And so I like that challenge. And I don't know if that's lessons learned or if that's just like figure out what you like to do and just lean into that. And I was lucky enough to kind of intuitively fall into it.
I was having a conversation with another leader recently, and she mentioned that she believes practitioners, when it comes to the programs that they're building, need to be more entrepreneurial. And I would love to get your point of view on that, given that it sounds like that whole kind of entrepreneurship kind of vibe is something that you hold near and dear.
Yeah, I mean, I think entrepreneurship is the ultimately to me it's the willingness to take risks and to develop a vision which is almost absurdly disconnected from the reality of today, right? When we said at Charity Water, our vision is a world where everybody has clean water. We were a small organization based in New York with like when I started, like probably 50 employees, and there are, more than 1 billion people around the world who didn't have access to clean and safe drinking water. And, my vision today at Airbnb.org is that anybody in need of emergency housing can find a place to stay. They can find a home to stay in. And of course, the world is a huge place, but I think the willingness to really think about what your vision is and then say it out loud. That's what I've learned from entrepreneurs. Elon Musk wants to go to Mars. Great. And I think that visionary part is something that many of us get bogged down in the day to day of like, wow, like I got a budget and I only have this many staff and what am I going to do? And I think losing sight of that North Star sells us short sometimes.
Now, Airbnb.org is a nonprofit, so separate from Airbnb, the entity. And I'm curious, what are some of the lessons that you took from your time at AmeriCares and Charity Water that you're now bringing to .org?
I think, Airbnb.org is a really unique thing. It's a 501(c)(3) that was founded by Airbnb about 5 years ago. There's an independent board, and it has a purely humanitarian mission. And our mission is to provide, temporary emergency housing to people in need, whether it's a mass displacement like the LA wildfires, or that emergencies on a personal level where you might need to travel for medical treatment for your child. And we have the ability, and because of our relationship with Airbnb, to leverage the entire platform, the 8 million listings around the world, the 5 million hosts, their comms channels, and all of that. So it's a really, really unique and unusual positioning for a nonprofit that's just getting started. I think what I learned over the course of my career, if I could say one thing, it would be to think long term and think about things in terms of where you're going to be 5 or 10 years from now. And that really changed for me how I went about building relationships with partner organizations, thinking about the investments in the organization. And I think, as we are building our network of partners around the world as Airbnb.org, I'm telling them, listen, we want to start with you. We're going to start small because that's where we are. We're going to be with you for the next 10 years. And I think that really is a game changer because so many things are transactional in this world and they just come and go and don't add up to very much, despite all the effort and resources put into them.
What about lessons you've learned in terms of those long term partnerships with other organizations? What advice would you give other practitioners that are thinking about those type of partnerships and how to structure them and how to ensure that they're able to give long-term support for organizations?
Well, I think the first thing is most of us have been hesitant historically to make long-term commitments because we didn't actually have the money in the bank, right? And so particularly, donors and justifiably because ethically you don't want to create expectations that you can't meet, right? And so you go in, you say, well, I can commit to the next 3 years. But after that, I don't know. I don't have any commitments. And I think that leads you into a logic trap, which is like, well, there'll be nothing after 3 years. And so you don't think beyond that because you can't sustain that. I think where I developed this, we really developed this approach at Charity Water, is we went in and we said, let's develop a collective vision. And I want you to understand my world and how things flow and what the resources look like and how I make decisions and I want to understand yours. And together we're going to come up with a long-term vision together about what this partnership could be, even though you may well not be here in your job 10 years from now and your organization may have changed the strategic plan, but still that long-term planning, I think, and so the willingness to be able to say like I'm not I can't write you a check for this today, but here's my true intention. And I think that was really liberating for us and unlocked lots of results because we just said up front, like, you're not on the hook. These are the intentions. This is what I think we can do. It's very powerful.
Can you walk me through an example of that type of session where you're collaborating with another organization trying to create that collective vision? I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of a practitioner that might be thinking, "Oh, this sounds great, but how do I do it? How do I get people to the table to have that type of high level conversation?"
So I can give you a couple examples. One today, from in the Airbnb.org context. So we have just launched a program last October to support low-income families who travel for medical treatment. So we there's a huge need around the world, and there are many organizations, amazing organizations, working on that topic, like Ronald McDonald House or the Leukemia Society of Italy or whatever. They're supporting patients. And part of what they do is they help them with lodging, or transportation or food budgets or whatever. So there is the infrastructure for patient assistance. These folks have never used Airbnbs, generally have not used Airbnbs as part of their model. They understand hotel vouchers, or they might give a stipend or something like that. But then when we say, hey, we could get you some free Airbnbs, that requires some organizational change. And these folks are very resource constrained. Their social workers already got a caseload that is way too big. And now you're like, okay, and by the way, you can book free Airbnbs for these people. And the social worker is saying, well, with what time? What if they don't like it? Airbnbs are, like, what if they break something? It's not like a hotel. I understand that. I've been doing so. There is a lot of efficiency in the patterns, and when we bring in something new, the organization needs to invest headspace, time, personnel, systems, reputation into it, and that may be worth it if we're just coming with a short term offer. And so, and right now, we're not yet in a position where we can come and say, we will solve all your problems forever. So what we do is we say, let's start small. And we realize that this small pilot may not really probably doesn't make sense unless you're thinking about it in the context of a 5 to 10 year relationship, in which case we're going to build big. And 2 or 3 years from now, you're going to have a program which is humming, creating great impact for the people you care about. And the resources that you put into it are going to be modest, and we're going to go in this together. And so I think it's about getting the organization to invest the resources in there to meet you where you are. In the water sector, we'd go in. It required a lot of infrastructure, so you needed Land Rovers and drilling rigs and like big capital investments. And so, if you're going to buy $1 million drilling rig and you only have a 3 year plan, it's going to be really undercapitalized. And 3 years, drilling rig will last for 20 years. And so that those kinds of investments are what really get unlocked when you start talking long term with people.
The medical stay program, what's the long-term vision for that? Where do you see that going in the future?
I mean, the macro vision here is that we want to bring Airbnbs. There are 8 million listings around the world, and these can be a huge asset for the social sector. And currently, they're not really being taken into account. When people think about temporary lodging, whether you're FEMA or the Red Cross or Ronald McDonald House, they're thinking about congregate shelters, hotel vouchers, or their own residences. And there's this new technology which is called Airbnb. And we don't think of it as a new technology because our lives are moving so fast. But 20 years ago, Airbnb didn't exist. And today it exists. And so those playbooks need to get updated, and this becomes another option. So we know that there are families all over the world who struggle for temporary lodging when they travel for medical treatment. In Italy alone, there are 1 million people who travel from the south of Italy every year to the north of Italy for medical treatment because the good hospitals are in the north and the south is very poor. Of those 1 million people, there would be tens of thousands of them who really are incredibly financially, logistically, psychologically stressed out by the lodging component of what they're dealing with. And I think we can solve that. I think we can open these homes. I think we can get the donations to be able to pay for them and remove this aspect of stress for the family so that they can focus on supporting each other and supporting going through the medical treatment that they want. So my vision is that in the future, anybody who needs help knows that they can count on Airbnb.org. And today, that's just not yet the case.
And can you actually talk a little bit about how .org actually got started? Because the way it got started is so unique.
So the way it got started was very grassroots and organic. The idea came, it predates the organization. The idea came during Hurricane Sandy, which hit New York City in 2012. There were thousands of people displaced. And there was a host in Brooklyn, and she called Airbnb customer service and said, "Hey, I've got an empty room. Like, I'd love to take somebody in and just get them out of the shelter and give them a free place to stay." And that kind of went viral with hosts in New York City. Had over 1,000 hosts sign up. They hosted a lot of people, and they were like, "Wow, we never like they were in the leisure travel business, right? Never occurred to them that Airbnbs would be used for anything other than leisure travel." And so that was the spark. And then it kind of lived. It lived internally, kind of as a CSR initiative when there would be big things and get together and sort of hack together some systems. But then before the company IPO'd in 2020, the founders got together and said, "Hey, this is really something we think is important contribution, and we want to really sort of formalize it." And that's when they chose to build the 501c, set up the 501c3. And the 501c3, like interestingly, and I actually don't know of any other corporate foundation that is like this, but it's set up as a public foundation, which means we take in donations from the public. You think of many companies have foundations, but they are private foundations, right? So in this case, the idea is Airbnb can cover all of the operating expenses. They can they can donate, very generously, but it can be bigger than that. Other people can donate and we can help more people. And any other donations that we get in, 100% of that flows directly through to a family so that they can book the Airbnb that best fits their needs. So really kind of innovative, interesting model that it's not quite fish or fowl, right? It's not quite corporate foundation and it's not quite NGO or nonprofit. We are kind of the blend of the strengths of both of those, which is really exciting and a fun model to be experimenting on.
I think one of my favorite things about the story of .org is that number one, as you mentioned, it was started grassroots, but more importantly, the company acted on it. They saw the signal and realized this was important and we should do something about it.
It's I mean, it's a very values driven company. I somebody had held on to this, but I dragged up an email from Brian, the CEO, to Joe, the co-founder, probably from 6 months after they founded in 2008. And Brian is saying to Joe, like, "Hey, I think we should really start to set up like something, something for social good and think about this." This is before .org, right? This is before the emergency or anything. But already they were thinking about that. Brian's mom is a social worker. Like they came from a values-driven thing. And if you've been exposed to the Airbnb culture of, belong anywhere, very community-minded thing, I think, what we're doing is there's this basic human instinct to help your neighbors in times of need. And what we're doing is like we didn't invent that. That existed. What we're doing is using technology to be able to supercharge that and house thousands of people around the world. And so in a similar way, I think the company did that with, the desire of people to open up their homes to other people and that has really driven a lot of growth, obviously, but the same thing exists in times of need.
How does .org interact with Airbnb, the company?
We build strong relationships with leaders across the companies. We build operating relationships with many of the operating groups. And because what we're doing is kind of it is a microcosm of Airbnb, all of our functions need to touch Airbnb's functions. Customer service, payments, um, uh, booking flows, cancellations, you name it. And then obviously on the ground, we leverage their teams a lot. Like if I want to meet the head of the National Emergency Response Emergency Management Agency in France, it's easy for me to pick up the phone and talk to the government relations guys at Airbnb because they know them, so they can make an introduction. So we have enormous. I mean, it's such a huge asset for us, intangible asset for us as a startup nonprofit. That having come from real startup nonprofits, I'm like, when we really had to scrap for this stuff, this is amazing. Like, if you can ask for it, the company's just from a values point of view, from a willingness point of view, just been so incredibly committed to this.
One of the challenges that keeps coming up with practitioners is executive buy-in. This is for the programs they're creating, initiatives that they want to roll out. They're constantly having to pitch and communicate with executives, but not everyone has that experience with executives. Can you take me inside those conversations when it comes to the work that .org is doing, and maybe you're talking with other leaders at the C-suite level? How do you communicate the value of the work that you're doing to them and connecting the dots so that they understand why you do what you do as a team?
Yeah, I mean, I think listen, that executive buy-in is a challenge for everybody. Um, not limited to the social sector, right? Like, I mean, talk to the general manager of, some offshore business, about how it works with them, calling into headquarters and trying to get resources, right? So I think this is a generic management challenge. And I think in the social sector, we tend to think, oh, because we're a cost center or something like that, like we won't get. But actually, like there are a lot of parts of the organization that face the same thing, right? So I think you're not alone, you know, and I think looking to other colleagues who are good at this, getting feedback from them, thinking about your approach is always helpful, and that's something that I do a lot of. I think I found two things. One is I go back to this long-term view, and when I'm using my time with executives and leadership, I'm trying to align on on the strategic level. And like, what are we trying to accomplish? And then I'm saying, listen, you've hired me, and this is my recommendation, but this is your company, right? Like, and so I think aligning on that then makes everything so much easier. And I think what happens is we end up being quite tactical and we say, what do you think about this campaign? Should this be red or should this be blue? Or, should we get into, and I think that's really hard for executives because they're operating at a very strategic level. So I think agreeing on the first principles, agreeing on the 3-year plan or 5-year plan or 5-year vision or whatever, whatever your planning cycle is. And then I think the last thing is just really listening to, like, what does your audience care about? Do they care about the human impact stories, in which case, like, get the best stories you can, or do they care about the data? Like, what are they trying? And different executives, it's will respond very well to like anecdotal stories that are just really emotionally driven versus the data, and that's how they lead their business. Sometimes it's very intuitively, creatively. So I don't know if that's terribly helpful, but I think the long-term bit aligning on the long-term vision and really understanding of what is it that they're trying to accomplish will get you much further.
You mentioned the concept of being a cost center, and so many practitioners are struggling with that. That's the perception that many executives have about corporate impact. And practitioners are trying to figure out, how do I navigate these waters? How do I convince, for lack of a better term, executives that no, impact is not a cost center if we structure it correctly? Any advice for leaders out there that are struggling with that, of trying to ditch the perception of being a cost center?
Well, I think you got to tell your story, right? It's on us to tell our story in a compelling way, and and if you're not a good storyteller, go hire one, a freelancer or something like that. I mean, this is what we found at Charity Water. People would say, like, "What's the secret sauce at Charity Water?" Because we were so well known for our comms and our storytelling, and I was like, We hired good storytellers and we let them tell the stories. We didn't go to somebody who was an amazing like programs person and say, by the way, can you write the story for me? Like, so I think we're asking people to do too many things. So I think one, like, really think about what your story is. Um, and 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 you can be a great programs person, but go get a good storyteller. I think that's one thing I learned at Cherry. You know, I think you got to get out and tell your story. You know, the work that we're doing is really important, really impactful, and there's so many great stories out there. So here's one thing we did with Airbnb, which is that there's a like any company, there's a large consumer insights and research function at the company. The researches all sorts of perceptions around the brand and how the business is doing and all that stuff. And we went to them and got Airbnb.org included in their quarterly surveys of perception and all that stuff. So we built our data acquisition sources into the corporate data acquisition, if that makes sense, as opposed to going and hiring a separate consultant ourselves to come in and do, hey, here's our consultant, and they've done a white paper about like how great this is, how much impact it's getting, and yes, it makes the company look good. So, so embedding it into the credible data, I'm speaking more to folks who are in the CSR world and working on social impact in a little bit more conventional jobs than I do. I think finding your consumer insights people and leveraging the systems internally versus contracting your own annual impact report or something like that, which is not going to have the same level of credibility. That's one thing that we did, which has been really helpful.
What makes a compelling story?
There's a hero, there's a villain, and there's a challenge, and you need to think about those components and who's playing what role. And one of the things that I was taught a long time ago was that we often make the mistake as to who the hero is, and we put ourselves in as the hero. Look at my company; we are saving the world. You know, look at my and it doesn't just go for nonprofits, but it's also for companies, right? Like the hero is the customer, the hero is the beneficiary, the hero is the partner, and we are guides in the story, right? So in my case, the hero needs to be the families that we are helping. And they are the Luke Skywalker, and we're just the guide. And the adversity, the villain that they're facing is displacement and lack of a place to stay. And so I think in our comms, I think a lot about like, what's the villain? What's the problem we're trying to slay? What's the problem we're trying to solve? And what's the dragon, out there? Who's the hero? Like who are we trying to and then who's making all this happen? It's a little abstract, but one of the things we learned at Charity Water was like we're not the hero, and I think that um, that gets lost in translation oftentimes in storytelling and in marketing, and you get the wrong hero in there, and then it's boring.
One of the things I love about how Airbnb.org is structured is that it's structured in a way that leverages Airbnb's like superpower. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on when practitioners are thinking about creating programs, launching initiatives, should they connect their work to their company's core competency or should they not? Is it okay to not be connected to the core superpower?
Yeah, I think it's definitely okay not to be connected to the core superpower because many companies build products which aren't necessarily relevant, in the humanitarian space, right? I mean, and you see this all the time where companies try to force fit their product because they genuinely want to be helpful. I think it comes from a genuinely a genuine place, but you may very well say, listen, the best and greatest good that we can do is to take some of the money that we make and then invest it in a particular thing. I think when companies do that, my advice to them is pick pick one thing or pick two things And what I've seen is companies tend to spread it way too thin. And it looks different in different markets, and it looks different from one year to the next, and it gets spread way too thin. And so the company doesn't you don't get the reputational benefit of kind of owning an issue, right? And that's very hard because there's a lot of stakeholders in the company, and people have different opinions, and the board will think one thing, and the executives think one thing, and the marketing people will think one thing. But I think if you can land on one thing, that you're going to really commit to, you'll become known for that, and you'll get the reputational benefit. I've seen Airbnb do this on the company side by doing market research, which is like, in a particular market, what are the issues that most are going to resonate? And so they'll test, 10 different things. They're not related to .org, of course, but then they'll pick one and really start chipping away at it, get expert at it, build relationships, credibility, become known for it. And so it's not necessarily using their core product, but it is creating value add.
That's something that I've been seeing lately in terms of focus. So a lot of practitioners now are really narrowing their focus on, for example, grant making and giving grants to a smaller number of nonprofits versus a ton of nonprofits because they're trying to focus in on what makes the most sense for our company and what makes the most sense in terms of how we're able to support society. So I have seen that happen quite a bit as of late.
Yeah, I mean, I think and building relationships with and I come back to the long-term partners, right? Like building genuine relationships which are beyond the transactional exchange of money, right? That are truly like you're building something new. Essentially, I mean, I come from a background where we always at AmeriCares and at Charity Water and here, we always accomplished our mission through implementing partners. I think the thing that I learned in the course of that was really it was interesting at Charity Water very specifically. Like we figured out when we were evaluating a partner whether they would be a good partner for us. We had it boiled down to five questions that you had like empirical answers to. Were they doing more than $1 million a year of rural water supply? What were the qualifications of their team? What kind of projects were they doing? Were they doing large pipe schemes or boreholes or whatever? So there are five like literally checklist things. You just go out and do it. And we would sign up partners, and after a couple of years, they just kind of run out of gas. We're like, what happened? Like these guys should have been perfect. And we figured out there was a secret question, the sixth question, which was who's the champion? Who at this organization is like wakes up in the morning and wants this relationship more than I do? And it's not necessarily it could be a CEO, it could be a CFO, it could be a head of programs or something like that. But finding that like um that champion in your counterpart partners will just help drive so much more, I think, impact and depth in the relationship over time.
How do you find those champions?
It's hard and it takes experience. You really have to know what you're doing, honestly. Like, and this was tough learning for us in my previous job, which I was saying, we could send out fairly junior people with their clipboard and they would figure this out, right? But then, like, how do you find this nuance amount of people? And I think it takes a lot of experience. It takes time. You got to go and spend time with them. You got to get on a plane. You got to go have dinner with them and learn about how their management culture is. You sit in a meeting in their offices and you see like is it like what's the vibe? It's hard. It's that intangible thing, and that's where I think experience and judgment really comes into play, which comes with years of wear and tear. Honestly.
So we talked about your career, we talked about Airbnb.org. I want to switch gears a little bit and look at the corporate impact field as a whole. And I was reading an article that you wrote. You said, imagine what is possible if more companies apply their core capabilities in moments of crisis. And I was curious, beyond Airbnb, are there any other companies that you admire for the work that they're doing when it comes to disaster response?
I mean, there's honestly a lot of them. We're part of a cohort of uh, tech companies who are doing work in disaster response, and so I'm connected to so many of them, right? Like all of the big tech companies are doing some really doing really interesting work. But like UPS has stood out, in FedEx, delivering. When I was at Americares and we were flying airlifts into places, they were great companies. Home Depot has been great. You can think like there are companies who've really stood out. I think Amazon has enormous potential to really, because of their just amazing supply chain. These are things that are sort of difficult to repurpose, and they're very difficult to repurpose in the moment. So you got to think about it ahead of time. It's not like, oh, the LA fires are going and like we all want to help and okay, how are we going to improvise something? I mean, you can do something, but like you got to be committed to it up front and start to build the playbooks and the relationships and the processes to be able to do this. But I think GoFundMe is pretty amazing, right? Like they're a way for you to drive funding directly to families in need. And so there's a lot of interesting stuff. I think we're just getting started. Watch Duty. Well, Watch Duty is kind of Watch Duty is a nonprofit, but they're using this technology, which is an amazing app, right? But they're a nonprofit actually.
If a practitioner is thinking about disaster response and maybe they have a technology that they believe can add value, where should they start in terms of formalizing an actual program that can be used during crisis?
I mean, I think you want to start by really listening. And it sounds pretty easy, and everybody will say, yeah, of course. But like a lot of people go in, kind of with the story already written, right? Like, and I've seen this, all over humanitarian aid, where people come with a good idea, but the product market fit just isn't there, right? And you put a lot of resources into it. So I think, the starting point is really getting to people in the industry who've got a lot of experience, but at the same time are really open-minded and ready to be creative. Um, and listening to them and getting some advice from them, and then testing it on a small scale. Um, just try it out. I think you don't have to wait. You shouldn't wait for the big disaster. Like there are disasters happening every day. Like we responded to 60 different events already this year, right? So like every 2 or 3 days, we're housing somebody who's affected by a disaster. Now, sometimes those are like little apartment blocks that have been evacuated or small floods or something like that around the world. But there's stuff happening all over. Um, so you don't have to wait for the big LA or tsunami or something like that. Like just get out there and start working. I think testing it and piloting it is the way to go because when the rubber meets the road, it's it's pretty hard to move fast in a disaster in the chaos of a disaster and really have it work.
What about potential pitfalls or things that practitioners need to keep in mind? Because obviously, they want to help out, and a lot of companies want to help out, uh, but there might be some pitfalls that they should be aware of going into something like this.
I mean, I think the big one is gift in kind, right? People want to donate their product, and that's really difficult. Particularly in the immediate aftermath when things are really chaotic and the supply chains uh, are not working very well. Everything's getting clogged up in warehouses, and companies genuinely want to give their products away. That's been historically the big one, right? And so you make a wonderful product and you want to give it away. I think we're in the digital business, right? So we are providing digital credits so that people can book Airbnbs. So in a sense, it's like a gift in kind. And I think that there's a lot of potential there for people to make the donations digital as opposed to actual stuff. Like here's a voucher. So work with a trusted partner that's working with the affected community to give out vouchers for whatever you got, right? If you are in the business of making coats or pet food or scooters or whatever. Like if you give those vouchers to an organization that's on the ground, can distribute those, then the people can go to a retailer and get it. Like if you could do that, that would be hugely helpful. And still get your product out there, right? I mean, it's more complicated than I'm making it out to be, but I think gift in kind is a big one. I think going in without a plan, like not planning ahead, is always a recipe for frustration. You know, so take the time ahead of time, do your tabletop exercises, um, figure out, draft your press release. Like get those things ready. Who's going to push go on the comms? Uh, who's gonna approve the budget? Like all of these things, like you can kind of break them down, and they can become real bottlenecks and cause a lot of frustration. So I think not having a plan is probably the second biggest one.
I mentioned a little while ago, but there is a lot of uncertainty in the space right now for practitioners, given layoffs and things of that nature. What advice would you give a leader right now who's navigating uncertainty, that really wants their work to be more durable, to be a value add to both society as well as business?
I mean, I think all of us, regardless of whether you work in, social impact or not, like you want to, I think you want to be aligned with a company where your values are aligned, right? And so really thinking about that, to me, that's really important. And um, I would say if a company, you would know where you work and like if you're working in social impact or corporate social responsibility and you know that this is not a priority for the company, when there's an economic downturn or they've got to change strategy, like this is going to be one of the first things that's going to contract. So I think, we all know like, hey, is the CEO really committed to this or not? And I think most people would answer that question. So I think um, that would go again. I try to drive the parallels. Like, we tend to think about ourselves as like different from everybody else, but actually, like in my travels in the world, like we're the same, right? Like, does the company really value design? Does the company really value, you know, does it really value cutting edge technology? Does it really value AI? So like if you're in any of those fields, and then you're at a company where you're like, oh man, like nobody wants to talk about AI here, but like I love AI. It's probably not the place to be. Um, and start to think about where do you want to go that's going to align with your values and what you love doing every day.
All right, let's end with this. What's one thing that you now know about impact work that you wish you would have known earlier in your career?
Oh, there's so many things. I mean, you start out quite naive about it, that it's going to be easy. And actually it has all the complexities of building anything else. And so I think what the one thing that I've learned is that change takes a long time. And the projects that I'm the most proud of, that I think had the biggest impact in my career, are projects that took me years and years, like 7 years, 10 years to work on. And so I think when I go through my daily frustrations, I try to zoom out and I say, okay, I'm frustrated with the last 3 months, but that's 3 months on a 7-year path, and I'm going to get there. And even though like I may have had a dip in the last 3 months, like I'm going to pull it back up, and we're going to keep rising this thing. So I think it's just like pace yourself for the ultra marathon, and the reward at the end of that is absolutely incredible because the change that you'll make through that is going to be so deeply rooted and lasting and sustainable and real that it's going to be worth like all the suffering that, that you had along it. So take the long view. And maybe that's just because older in my career and whatnot, and I've been through a bunch of the cycles, but it it takes a long time to build something really important. But when you do, it's so worth it.
Christoph, thank you so much for the conversation. Thank you for your leadership in this space. And when I think about companies that are doing impact right, Airbnb is top of my list. So thank you for all the incredible work that you and your team have done over the years.
Great. Thanks so much for having me, Jeremy.
This episode is brought to you by Social Impact World, the intelligence layer for corporate impact. To learn more, go to socialimpactworld.com. I'm Jeremy Brown. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Behind the Impact.